Hi everybody. Welcome to our 6th part in our 9-part series, Ecology, Not Theology, an ecological reading of the Gospel of St. Matthew. We today are going to be looking at the next parable among the 7 main parables in the Gospel of St. Matthew that really have to be read all together. So if this is the first time you're tuning in to this series, I recommend that you go and listen to some of the other videos, the earlier ones that explore this idea of ecology, not theology. What we're trying to do is to ground Jesus' teachings where he ground them, in the ground.
That's right. And in fact, that is the subject of our parable today.
Absolutely. And one of the things we try to do is not turn the parable into a metaphor, but to actually look at what Jesus is describing in the natural world.
Right.
So today's parable begins, the kingdom of heaven. He's always describing the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like. So this is our metaphor. We don't need another metaphor after this metaphor to tell you how to behave in the church. This is the metaphor. One metaphor is enough. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. So we have been talking about seeds and how they fall on the ground. We've been talking about the wheat and the tares growing in the good soil. We've been talking about invasive species. We've been talking about women growing bread. And now we're talking about a field. And let's really look at that field today. The church is very eager to turn the field and the treasure into a metaphor. And Clark's going to tell you what's wrong with that.
Well, the standard interpretation of this from 400 or 500 years after the Gospels were first told orally until the present day says that this parable is about giving up everything for the gospel, giving up everything for Jesus, right? Give away all that you own and follow me, that sort of thing.
Let go and let God.
Yeah, let go and let God. But let go of your own dreams and embrace God's plan for you, which is always the church's plan, right? So it's all about it. There's a kind of an institutional absolutism that's at the bottom of this in the church's way of understanding it, right?
Yeah, and it's also what they interpret it as, and I think it's worth noting, is that people in the days before banks, in the days before lock boxes, would frequently bury their treasure out in the field, out in the backyard.
Where only they knew where it was.
This was a common practice. You would bury your treasure somewhere on your land.
Yeah.
And, and then the Viking hordes would come in and demand to know where it was, and you didn't have to tell them, and people would go up digging around looking for it. Now, Jesus talks about this practice in a lot of the other Gospels. Right.
There's the parable of the talents, right, where he talks of talent being a coin, right, where he leaves, a landholder leaves for a period of time and entrusts his money to 3 servants. One servant he gives a lot of money, to a lot of talents, right, of these special gold coins, and to another he gives a lesser number, and to one he gives only 1. And when he comes back, the others have invested it and used the money, but the one who took his talent and buried it in the ground so he wouldn't lose it is scolded by Jesus, saying, you didn't make the most of what I gave you. You didn't do anything.
You just buried it. You just hoarded it.
You just buried it.
Viking hoard. That word, hoard, H-O-A-R-D. It's what we do with treasure. We hoard it.
Right.
We want to pass it on. We want to have our bank account, our inheritance, our trust fund that we're going to pass down. This is our hoard. We bury money in banks now.
So in fact, this other parable is the tip-off in this parable that what we're looking at is not necessarily what it seems.
So we're looking at something else. What is Jesus talking about? So the question becomes, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field.
The question is, what is that treasure?
What is that treasure?
Yeah, what is that treasure?
And if we look at the previous parables, he's already told us. He said, we had seeds, we've had weeds, we've had invasive species, we've had what they would have thought of as invisible seeds, which was the leaven that brings things and makes them grow. That you can put a tiny little bit of something into this substance and it flowers. The bread grows. The field grows. And what makes a field rise like leavened bread? But seeds. Put a box of treasure in the ground and nothing happens.
Right.
Put a seed in the ground.
In fact, you can't even use it in the ground as long as it's buried. It's not really useful.
And it's just going to sit there.
Right.
But put a seed in the ground and everything changes. It's going to grow into a plant that's going to have more seeds and it's going to create more abundance for you.
Right.
And so I often think of this man. He comes into a field and he realizes its abundance. He perceives its abundance. And he sees all these plants growing with all these different seeds on them.
Yeah, and in fact, this goes back to something we talked about earlier, this idea of psychotropic mechanisms, right? These are ancient symbols, right, that go all the way back to the beginning that were developed by human beings in order to manipulate other human beings into building civilizations, right, building kingdoms, maintaining large-scale agriculture, and so forth and so on. And one of the greatest of all of these psychotropic mechanisms, these symbols that have an effect on our brain chemistry, is gold, right?
Yeah.
Precious metals, right? Treasure, right? Gold, silver, jewels, right? These are phenomenal motivators for human activity.
And Jesus is saying, what's the treasure?
Yeah.
The treasure is what's freely given by the earth that's going to bring forth abundance.
Right.
And what does the man do when he finds that treasure? If you hide a seed in the ground, it doesn't stay there. It grows.
Right.
And you get more seeds.
It's like the woman who hid, Kingdom of Heaven, the parable we talked about yesterday, the Kingdom of Heaven, it's like leaven, which a woman hid in 3 measures of meal until the whole was leavened.
Yeah, you hide a seed in this field, and the next thing you know, you're going to have a whole field.
Well, like the mustard seed, it's the same thing.
Filled with what you need to eat and grow. And I think that's one of the there's a word in this parable we want to focus on, which is joy.
Yeah.
This is where our joy is. Our joy is in the natural world, in its natural abundance, its natural fecundity. This is the antidote to treasure.
Right.
But our world, and this is really important to think about, is really based not on this parable, but on extractive capitalism,
Right.
extraction. What have the human beings been doing since the Bronze Age when they find treasure hidden in the field?
Extract it.
They've extracted it.
They smelt it, they forge it, they make it into
The
coins,
copper
they
mines,
make it
the
into
tin
weapons.
mines, they're making
plows.
tools, plows,
Yeah.
swords, most of all, and salt. And these mines became a place of slavery,
Right.
of violence, and they exist even today. And we want to not think about them a lot of
Right,
times.
right.
We
But-
do.
about the metals in our cell phones, for instance. Yeah,
And much of the technology for solar panels and wind farming is based on rare metals that are being even now extracted in slave-like conditions and violent situations, lithium mines, terrible, horrible mining, where we are taking the treasure hidden in the earth and instead of hiding it back in and letting the world come into bloom, we're pulling it out
right.
and polluting and destroying all that we have and have been given. And I think it's important to bear witness to this and to see it, that mining and extraction of the treasure of the earth has been the greatest violence we have done to the earth. In fact, it's one of the reasons our age is sometimes called
The Anthropocene, that's the term that's been
Anthropocene means the time of human beings,
Right.
but there was an author who called it the Anthropocene. It's an obscene
Yeah.
era of violence.
And what he specifically refers to is the geological layer that we are presently laying down, right, on the surface of the planet. He says that, in the future time, when people get to the period of time in the archaeological or the geological record, come to the strata that matches our time, what they will find mostly is extractive materials. Our age will mostly be defined by the presence of ores, right, that have been materials that have been extracted from the environment and then laid down on the surface.
And these mighty
junk, in other words.
Junk, crap.
Yeah, junk.
And it become, we turn it, what do? We take this stuff out of the earth and turn it into crap.
Yeah.
And then somehow just identify this with our wealth.
Right.
This is our wealth. And what Jesus is saying 2,000 years ago is, look.
This is not the true treasure.
The true treasure is this tiny mustard seed. The true treasure is the leaven.
Right.
The true treasure is these seeds that fall on the ground and then rise up and give you more.
Right.
They're ready to give you more. They're always going to give you more. They're always going to, and they're all, it's not just they're going to give you more of food. We get here to something really powerful, which Jesus identifies as joy.
You know, one of the greatest corruptions of Jesus' teachings has been in the prosperity movement, and in general, the tendency to read his parables all about in terms of capitalism, right? And there are a lot of books, and a lot of sort of New Age programs that are based on this idea. A lot of megachurches are founded on it, right? But Jesus' teachings are not about profit, right? And not in the way we normally think of it. His teachings are much closer to permaculture, right? If you look at the images that he uses, the parables that he uses, the teachings that are the closest to his heart, and the teachings that are most readily identified with and understood by his hearers, his original hearers, right?
And you have to realize what the situation he's living in. He's from Nazareth, which is a very rural country area. So he's grown up very close to the natural world, really a lot. People mostly lived outside. You went indoors to sleep. You didn't really,
right.
You didn't spend much time indoors.
Nazareth was the real backwoods area of Jesus'
with a
time.
lot of folk practices. And by the way, it wasn't just a monolithically Jewish culture. You've got to realize you're in the crossroads of civilization here, and you have the huge Dionysus worship. You have, you've got influences coming in from India and Buddhism. Jesus didn't have to go to India for 30 years to get Hinduism. It was there in the culture. I mean, they were the crossroads of civilization.
A lot more travel and trade than people, and historians are ideologically based and usually, have something to prove. So there's been a tremendous amount of emphasis on religious purity, right? And there's this idea, people really deeply want to believe that Judaism developed in a bubble, and then Christianity develops in a bubble, and that there are no outside influences. In fact, the Jewish and Christian cultures of its day was surrounded by pagan goddess worship.
And completely infiltrated by
completely
it.
Infiltrated
and completely... Now, Jesus is writing about the earth, but he's also under a period of Roman imperialism. So the Romans have invaded Palestine. And why have they invaded it? For extraction.
Right.
Because they want to take everything they can from this land. And that's always why people invade. There are two things they want. What's going on in the Ukraine? Why are the Russians invading the breadbasket of the world? You tell me. What two things?
So it's whatever they can extract from the earth. It's food or ore, basically.
Food and ore are the two things they want. And slaves. We want to turn people into slaves to extract what we want from the ground. And fascinating is to look at all modern wars have all been petroleum based. Yeah. And there have been a lot of books written about this.
Even the wars like World War I didn't start that way, ended up that way by the time they were over.
It became wars about the control of petroleum.
Of oil.
And the Romans want to control this land and extract what they need from it. They're not arriving in this land and saying, oh my God, look how beautiful it is. I feel such joy.
And let's just think for a moment about some of the other things Jesus says about treasure and coin, right? Like he says one famous interchange. Someone says, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he says, show me a coin. And they hand him a coin. He says, whose face is on the coin? He says, Caesar's face. He says, give Caesar's what is his, right? So his level of indifference to traditional economical models, right? Traditional notions of economy is breathtaking sometimes.
Breathtaking.
How you can turn that into a profit-based capitalistic modern American Christianity. I really don't know. You really have to live in denial of.
You have to live in denial of everything he taught, and you have to
really
not be reading this what he's saying. And I've been reading this extraordinary book right now. It's called Paradise Found, and it's about the arrival of the Europeans into the American continent, and they experience it as a paradise. And these descriptions they send home. This book is filled with documents of first primary sources of the letters people were writing about the world they were seeing, where you couldn't sail your boat. There were so many fish in the water. There were so many whales, hundreds of whales in the sea, birds filling the sky, just an abundance beyond measure. And what was the
herds of buffaloes in North Carolina just wandering around?
I mean, just, sea otters on the East Coast. I mean, things that were just, and there were species that disappeared so fast because the feeling, the idea of these Christian, let's be honest, these Christian conquistadors from France and Spain and England and Holland was extraction. Yeah. We've got to take everything we can, and we've got to turn the beavers into beaver hats, and we've got to turn the birds into feathered hats, and we've got to extract everything until this beautiful, beautiful place is polluted and despoiled and dead.
Yeah. And this starts right from the beginning.
Day one.
They don't miss a beat when they come in. And let's also be honest, because human beings are human beings, and modern human beings who practice agriculture are a particular type of human beings. And any place that you have where people are practicing large-scale, organized agriculture, they are practicing extraction. Whether they may seem like an indigenous community, but if you have vast numbers of them living in close proximity to one another and farming the land, they will deplete that land and have to live elsewhere, and they will develop the same predictable problems, whether they're European or not.
This has been written by Jared Diamond in Collapse and Gun Germs and Steel in very fascinating and important ways to look at. But what Jesus is telling us to do, and let's see what he tells us to do for today, is to step outside and look at what treasure you've been given. Yeah. And I don't care if you're in the ugliest portion of the ugliest, most concrete city. Look for the weed pushing through the concrete. I frequently pray to those weeds that are breaking down the asphalt on the edges of pavement, because they are the treasure. They're going to regreen the earth for us. They're going to transform this asphalt-ridden world back into a paradise again. And so they are the treasure. Where is our joy? What is our true treasure? That is what Jesus asks us to do when we step outside today, or to look outside the window if we can't leave our homes. What is our true treasure? Where does our joy come from?
Where is it hidden? Because it's often hidden in plain view. The idea here is of a treasure that is close at hand, right? Treasure that's already there.
And the kingdom is close at hand.
Yeah.
It's not far away. One of the things it's such an easy detail to overlook, but the relationship between greenery and violence is fairly direct. The more greenery there is in a place, the less violence there is. More trees, less violence. It's an actual, simple truth.
You're thinking about urban environments.
Urban environments.
It's not necessarily true in certain tropical countries.
Countries where, true enough.
A lot of green. But in urban environments, the more green they have, the less violence there is, because people are soothed and calmed by that, right? And feel a connection to the land that stabilizes them, that they don't necessarily feel when they're just surrounded by. We're basically everywhere they look, there's nothing but human culture.
So today we're asked to see our treasure hidden all around us. The treasure is hidden in seeds all around us. And those seeds are our treasure. And this isn't a metaphor for faith or appropriate behavior. This is the reality, the lived reality of the planet we are a part of. And it's painful to go through these parables and to see what was done with them for 2,000 years. Clark and I, Way of the Rose has existed now for 11 years. This will be our 11th anniversary on the feast day. The first time we've ever talked about the teachings of Jesus, because it's so painful.
Yeah, they've been so co-opted and so perverted for so long that a lot of people come into our group and they say, they're actually very relieved that there's not a lot of Jesus talk, that it isn't Christocentric, as it were.
And you won't even hear us using the word God, because God feels like an abstraction. It's not a word Jesus uses. It's too abstracted from this lived reality of the dirt and the soil and the seeds.
Right.
If Jesus is a devotee of the mother, we see it in these parables.
Right.
That's where my joy is. And we're seeds. We're seeds that will be planted in the earth and return. And that, too, is our joy.
I think that's it.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Are we same time, same place tomorrow? No.
No, we will have to do it later.
We're going to do it on the evening. We'll do it at 7 o'clock at night tomorrow night.
Something like that.
Something like that. We'll let you know.
We'll let you know.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.